Welcome to the Ubuntu Server series. Today we're going to talk about recovery tools. And when I say recovery tools, I mean for your Ubuntu system when something goes wrong, what tools do you use to actually fix it, get it working again? We're going to talk about a couple different aspects of that. We're going to talk about the Ubuntu recovery mode. We're going to talk about a live CD based recovery, which is something I use quite often if I need to. And then one of the most common problems with Linux distributions, and maybe not so much anymore, however it's still a big problem, is fixing Grub when it breaks. Grub is the bootloader. As you know, we've talked about it before. It's the grand unified bootloader, and a lot of times operating systems like Windows, or even if you install Linux over top of something else, sometimes the bootloader will get messed up and it won't boot right. So I'm going to devote the last part of this nugget to fixing Grub when it breaks. But let's get started. First of all, I'm going to show you the recovery mode that's an option when you boot the server and some things you can do once you're in recovery mode. First things first, since we're talking about going into recovery mode, we have to actually be on the server that we're going to be entering recovery mode in. So here we are on our server. Now you'll notice the font is super tiny, and I did that because I want to make sure everything fits on the screen. So first things first, we need to restart the system. Now I could just power cycle it. I could also put in my password correct. I could just power cycle it, but I'd rather just reboot like you're supposed to do. So we'll pretend nothing went wrong, but the scenario here is there's something wrong with the system. Like, for example, we don't remember the SPowers user or password. So that example that I just inadvertently did by typing my password wrong, let's say that I forgot my password. Well, we could power cycle the computer. I'm actually typing reboot, but we would just shut it off and then hold down the shift key as the computer starts. So I held down the shift key during the restart, and now we get this menu. If we were to enter the top one, the default one, it would just boot right into Ubuntu like normal. However, we want to go into recovery mode. So select that, hit enter, and we get the recovery menu. Now this is a very useful menu. You're going to see there's a lot of things here that are very, very useful. Things like running file system check. If we have an error where the computer won't boot up correctly all the way because there's a corrupt file system, if we go into recovery mode, we can run file system check right from here. That's very convenient. We can try to repair broken packages if apt-get breaks. We could try to repair Grub. However, this is kind of a weird issue because we can update Grub bootloader from this menu, but in order to get into the recovery menu, we actually have to enter Grub to do it. So while there's an option here to update the Grub bootloader, you'll probably never get here if Grub's actually broken. All right, we can enable networking. What I actually want to show you is we've booted into recovery mode, and now if we select this root menu option, it's going to drop us directly into a root shell. So now we are root. We've never logged in. Okay, nowhere along here did I enter the root password. In fact, on this system, I don't even know the root password. So now we're root. We have full access to the system. However, you'll notice up here that it says the file system state is in read-only mode. So if we actually want to make changes to the file system, even though we're superpower root, the file system's actually mounted read-only. So we can't, we can't make any changes to the file system. So, for example, there's a file called test in the root home directory. So if I tried to delete that, it's going to say you can't remove test because it's a read-only file system. However, because we're root, we can actually mount this read-write. What we would type is mount -o, and then for options, and then we would say remount, comma, read-write, and then what file system do we want to remount, rewrite? Well, the root directory. So hit enter, and now we should be able to remove test. So now we have full read and write access to the root partition. So what can we do now? Well, we are root on the system without needing to know root's password. So we could do something like change SPowers password. So now I've changed SPowers password even though I didn't even know root's password. So system recovery can be a very powerful tool. However, it's not a tool that you're going to use if your system can't boot at all, because you still have to get into Grub in order to go into recovery mode. So if we hit exit, we're going to get back to this menu where we can do things like do the file system check, or we can just resume the normal boot. It's going to warn us that if we have a GUI, it may not work right, but we'll just hit enter, it'll reboot, and so now here we are with our server. However, if I need to log in, I need to use that new password that I just changed it to, and sure enough, the new password worked. So that's recovery mode. Having root access to a system I mean, you've learned enough about Linux through this series. You know that, wow, that's some powerful stuff. You can make any changes you want to the system. So recovery mode is powerful. However, you have to have a working grub bootloader on your system in order to get into recovery mode. Otherwise, you have to boot from something like a recovery CD. And that's what we'll cover next. Alright, so we just covered recovery mode, booting from the system. This is booting directly from the hard drive. Now, important things to note, bootloader, Grub2 must be working. Obviously, if you have broken Grub, you can't tell Grub to boot into recovery mode. It just doesn't work. Now, what this does is it gives you root access to the system, which is obviously makes you all powerful. You can make any changes you want to your system. It's important to note that if you want to make any changes to the hard drive, you have to remount it in read-write mode, which is what we just did on the command line. Otherwise, it's just read-only. You can't really make any changes. And just an interesting note, recovery mode rarely works for me. If there's something going wrong with my system, apart from maybe a user forgetting their password or forgetting the root password or something, I just rarely have recovery work for me. If there's a real problem on my system, usually something's wrong with Grub and I can't even get into recovery mode. And that's where we have to do something like a live CD-based recovery. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to demonstrate a live CD recovery. I'm just going to use the standard live CD that, Ubuntu desktop CD. Now what this does mean is that generally there's going to be a GUI environment. There are a few rescue CDs that are text only, but most of them have a GUI environment that you're going to boot your server to. And that's actually what we're going to do. Again, we're just going to use the standard Ubuntu live CD. Now, this is the best way to go if you need to recover data from your hard drive because it doesn't touch the hard drive. Remember back in recovery mode, we were still booting from our hard drive. So if there's something going wrong with your hard drive and you're worrying about data getting lost, it's best to use a live CD because the live CD doesn't touch your hard drive until you tell it to, right? Until you're trying to recover some data. Right. I actually, to be honest, I prefer to use a non-Ubuntu CD for these types of things, like something like Canopix or SysRescue CD or one of the many Linux-based rescue CDs out there. I particularly, for some reason, like the System Rescue CD that's at www.sysrescd.org. I like the tools that are included on there, but there's a handful of others. There's the Ultimate Boot CD. There's just a boatload of rescue CDs. We're going to look at another one when we look at Grub, and those are the ones I prefer because they come with recovery tools as opposed to the live CD we're going to boot from right now, which just brings us into a live Ubuntu install. Nothing wrong with that, and that's what we're going to use, but if you're trying to do some forensics or really trying to rescue some data, you're going to want a system that has some tools for doing those sorts of things. But let's say that we can't boot up into recovery mode, or that's not enough, so we're going to boot into the live CD mode and then mount our underlying hard drive from there. So we'll go back to our server. So back on the server, what I'm going to do is, now obviously mine's a virtual machine, so I'm going to quote-unquote insert a CD. Now ideally you're going to use the version that matches your distribution, so I'm going to use 1204.2, which is what our server is running, but this is the desktop version. So I'm going to select that, I'm going to insert that CD and have it connected on boot up, click OK, and then I'm going to restart the server and have it go into, and have it boot from the CD. So on reboot, I'm going to tell it to boot from the CD drive. And now we're going to see it'll boot up directly from the CD drive. I'm going to tell it to try Ubuntu without installing. So this will just boot the live version of the GUI Ubuntu. So here we are with the live booted CD, right? This is Ubuntu desktop booted on the CD. This is on our server hard drive, but this is just running off CD. Now I want to get to a command prompt. Now this is just a trick in Ubuntu in general. Control-Alt F1 will bring us to a text prompt right here. Now you'll notice here I'm the user Ubuntu. Ubuntu has no password, so if I type sudo su dash, now all of a sudden I'm root. Okay, so now I'm root. I'm still on the live system. I'm not on the hard drive. I'm just running from the CD. So if I actually want to access that underlying system, I need to mount that hard drive underneath. Our root file system, I need to mount that underneath. So let's see if there's anything in the mount folder. No. So I'm going to create a folder called MNT and then hard drive. And now I'm actually going to mount dev sda1, which is our root partition on our hard drive underneath, and I'm going to mount that on mount hard drive. And now if we look, we'll see that is our hard drive. That is our server's hard drive right there. So now we can go in there and make changes if we want. We've mounted it read-write, so we could go into there and make changes. Or we could be even slicker if we want and do this. We could type chroot mnt hard drive. Now what is this going to do? Well, let's hit enter. And now if we type ls on the root level of the hard drive, it's going to be that exact same thing. So what's happened? We changed the root partition that we're currently functioning with. So now, just like when we went into recovery mode, booting from the hard drive, we've become root on our hard drive. Our underlying hard drive now is the root level partition, right? So if we go into, like if we type cd, so now we're in the root drive, nothing in here, but if we touch a file called test, now on our hard drive we created a file called test. If we want to change a password, we've changed the password for the user spowers on our hard drive. Now how do I know it's on the hard drive? Because there is no spowers user on the live CD, there's just that Ubuntu user. So this is a way that now we've taken control of the underlying hard drive and made it our live system by that chroot command. It's really kind of powerful and cool, and this is just one more way to gain access to your computer even if you didn't boot from it, which is something that happens more often than, the ability to just go into recovery mode. You could also, if we type exit now, we're back into the live CD. So now if we look in the, root directory, there's no test file because that was in the hard drive. So now we're on the live CD. We could do things like run file system check on our hard drive, even without being logged into it. So we could run file system check. We could do all of those things. We have full access to the hard drive even though we didn't boot from it. Okay, so that's how to gain access. That's how to recover some things, how to gain access so that you can fix things when they're broken. And there's only one more thing I want to cover in this recovery nugget, and that is what to do when your system won't boot at all from the hard drive, like when Grub is totally messed up. So I'm going to break our system and then we're going to fix it. All right, so let's do that right now. By far, one of the most common panicked calls I get from new system administrators or people who haven't had a system fail is that their system won't boot up. And generally that means that something has gone wrong with Grub. Either a Windows installation has erased the ability to boot to there, or trying to update something has broken Grub, so their system just won't boot. Now, there's a couple ways to fix Grub. Assuming that it's just Grub, and it usually is, the boot sector, that is messed up, there's the easy way, which I happen to like a lot because I like easy things, and that is just to boot from a live CD with the boot repair utility. It's a nice GUI tool. There's even a live CD that specifically boots directly to boot repair to fix Grub issues. That's the easy way. It just boots up, you click a button, and it searches for your Grub information and restores what's not there, etc., etc. It's really nice. It walks you through the steps you have to do if you have to actually do things. And then there is the hard way. And this isn't really hard. I mean, sometimes it's quicker, so you may want to do this way or try this way unless it's a little too complex for you, but this is to basically boot to a live CD and manually reinstall Grub. So we're going to walk through this process right now. We're going to boot to a live CD again after I break Grub, and we're going to reinstall it by hand, so to speak, and then we'll reboot. It should be fine. And then I'll briefly show you what I'm talking about with the boot repair live CD, okay, because it's just kind of a cool tool to have in your pocket if there's a system that's bad and you don't remember all the steps involved to do the live CD reinstallation of Grub. But we're going to do this manual way first. That's kind of the Ubuntu way to do it. Remember, this is the Ubuntu series, so this is using nothing but Ubuntu tools. So that's what we're going to do right now, and then I'll just mention that live boot CD option. Okay, so let's first of all break our system. Okay, I've restored our Ubuntu server back to the point where the font is all big and ugly, but so we can see it better. I'm going to log into the server, going to become root, and now this is the point where I break our system. While normally breaking things isn't part of a training, I'm going to show you just really quickly how I'm going to write over the master boot record without destroying the partition table. So on the first sector of the hard drive is where where Grub's boot code is stored and where also the partition table is stored. So we're going to use dd input file equals dev 0, which just means an endless string of zeros. Output file equals dev SDA, SDA for our hard drive where the root partition is stored. Now BS equals block size. Here's where it gets really tricky. I'm going to use block size 446 so it doesn't overwrite the entire sector, just the first 446 blocks. Count, I just wanted to do this one time, and what it's going to do is erase all of the boot code while leaving the partition table intact. Normally when grub gets corrupted, it's just grub that gets messed up, and so that's all I'm going to replicate here is grub getting messed up. I'm not going to do like partition recovery necessarily right now. It wouldn't be impossible, but this is how things normally break, so I'm just going to enter that. And now what I've done is I've written zeros where grub used to be. So if we reboot the system now, it's going to freak out. It's going to try to boot and it's not going to be able to. It's actually going to go back in and it's going to try to now boot from PXE because it can't find a hard drive that's bootable. Okay, so our system is completely broken. Now the hard way, yes, I know it's completely broken. Now the hard way to go about fixing this, or the manual way, is to boot to a live CD like we did before. So let's do that. Let's actually put a live CD in just like we did before. Put in the live desktop CD, say OK. We're going to reboot the system now. And so now we've booted to the live CD. It's going to boot up in live CD mode. I'm going kind of quick because we've done this part before, but just like last time, I'm going to hit Control-Alt-F1 to give me the command prompt, because all I want is this command prompt, all right? And type sudo su- so that I can become root again. But now remember, I'm booted from the live CD, so I actually need to make a directory so I can mount the hard drive. So just like last time, I'm going to make a directory in mount, in MNT, I'm going to call it hard drive. Now I'm going to mount our hard drive partition into that folder. And now we have that file system mounted, so if we do an ls of the hard drive, you'll see our system there. Now in order to install grub on the SDA device, the hard drive, I'm actually going to need to have access to things like the dev folder inside of the chroot. So this is a little bit different than the last time we were in here. I need to actually bind our currently running dev folder into the chroot. So in order to do that, I'm going to type mount bind, and I'm going to bind two different places together, our dev directory and the dev folder inside of our hard drive. I'm also going to do the same with the proc and the sys folder. And what that's going to do, now the next step is we're going to change the root, just like we did before, to mount hard drive. But the difference being now in the root environment of MNT hard drive. So we're actually into our hard drive as the root partition that we're currently in. But now if we do an ls of dev, since we use that mount bind command, now we have access to all the devices as well, which we wouldn't normally if we just mounted the hard drive partition. All right, so this is what makes the manual thing a little bit more tricky. Now that we've done all those tricky things, all we have to do is type grub -install, tell it where to install it on dev SDA, which we have access to now since we've mounted the dev system. Press enter. It's going to say the installation is finished, no errors are reported. I like to do an update grub to make sure that it has read in all the proper configurations. There it finds all of our kernels and stuff. So now what we've done is recreated the grub master boot record information. So if we type reboot now, we should see the system boot directly into our CBT server just like it was before we broke the master boot record. So that is the complex difficult, and it's only difficult because remembering to bind the dev and proc partitions are a little bit confusing inside the chroot environment before you do the chroot command. It can be a little confusing, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's not like you have to do some crazy rocket science in order to reinstall grub the manual way. But that's using just Ubuntu tools. That's how you would do it. Now I talked about using this easy way, right, with the live boot CD, and that's just a program called Boot Repair. And if you look for Boot Repair CD here on the SourceForge website, you'll see that this Boot Repair disk is a bootable CD that will automatically fix a grub that you've messed up. Okay, so I'll reboot to the CD to show you what it looks like, but we're not going to go through the process. It'll hold your hand and walk you through everything. If you have to type something, it'll actually give you the command to copy and paste into the terminal. It's pretty slick. So if we have our server here, basically we would just go in, and instead of booting to that Ubuntu CD, we would use the boot repair disk CD. Open that, click OK, reset the server, tell it to boot from CD, and then we get this really cool boot repair disk, which automatically starts up a GUI desktop manager with one option. So as soon as it boots up, you'll see it'll scan everything, and all of a sudden gives us just one button. Recommended repair. This will repair almost every grub issue that you run into. So you just click that, it'll go through, it'll walk us through what it's going to do and what it has to do. I won't go through the whole process because it's not Ubuntu specific, but the boot repair disk is a nice way that you don't have to remember all of the commands in order to do the work. It'll actually tell you you have to copy and paste this in the command line, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, that's the easy way, but even the hard way wasn't too difficult. In this nugget, we covered recovery mode, which requires that your grub install or that your grub program is working. We talked about the live CD recovery, how to get in there as root and be able to manipulate files even if you can't boot the hard drive, and then talked about a couple different ways of fixing grub when grub gets broken. Now, we've talked about grub before, but this is when it's broken, how you can fix it and get your system working again. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.